And this is Mr. Dan Snazelle, alias Snazzy FX. Thank you very much for coming and giving me a...
Hello. I guess I'm going to start just by playing a little bit, and then I'll talk about what's in the system, and we can have some questions and stuff. Okay, so something like that. I never really know what I'm going to... Oh, it's distorting. Every time I do a set, it's always improvised, so I never really know what I'm going to get. But anyway, this is the type of a system that I would use to play. And a lot of the modules in here are purpose-built for that application. So some of my modules came out of things that I wanted in live sets, like my kick module, or my new EQ module, or the drone bank, or the WoW and Flutter. So that's been a nice thing to be able to create modules that I would like to see in my system for the next time I play. And that's something that I'm constantly thinking about, and the more that I play on different systems or in different situations, the more that it makes me rethink about what modular can be as a format. And for me, it's quite exciting because when I first started making modules, I guess it was 2010, and modular was not as common for live use back then. And it's really nice now that you can throw this suitcase together and get on a plane, and you're great. So I guess somebody asked me yesterday, actually, I played last night, and someone was asking me how I get my kick sound. And obviously on this system, you maybe don't hear it being as large of a kick sound. But I have a new module called the roll-off, and it's extremely simple. Usually people aren't very excited about it when I first tell them about it until they maybe see it in use, because all it is a super small, inexpensive shelving EQ, which doesn't sound like that exciting. But once again, it's something that came out of playing at clubs and finding very quickly that you don't want to dedicate your filters to shelving. And yet you might not also want to be using the mixer, because if you have things patched into each other going through a delay, or if you're using feedback or whatever, it might be nice to have something within this context. And so it's tuned for 50 hertz and 10K, which works out quite well in a club environment. And in answer to that question, I usually have about 3 to 4 kick drums, and then maybe 3 to 4 percussion modules or elements. Or I'm also using the TR-09, which goes through the modular. And so I have, in my system, I have a lot of mixers and a lot of filters, and I think I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, at least 4 mixers. And so in order to sort of, when I do a live set and I'm playing techno and I have a DJ before me and a DJ after me, I want to create the same sense of flow that a DJ might. And so mixers allow me to combine different elements and sort of bring them up and bring them down in the same way that you would be changing records. Because I don't really want there to be any sign to the people on the dance floor that something has changed. Like, I want them to like it, and I want it to be good, but I don't want them to say, what the hell is going on? Everything was ruined because there's this guy playing modular. And it's taken me a long time, I guess, to come to a setup that works well for that, and it probably wouldn't work well for much else. It's not necessarily a good setup for making pop songs, but it's a lot of very small elements that can be put together. And one of the things that's really nice is the 4MS dual looping delay, because you can bring elements into that. And I have a lot of stuff ganged. Like, I'll take, let's say, 3 sounds, put them through an effect, put that through a filter, then put that into the looper. And so I can manipulate the cutoff in real time and then loop that, and then put that through other stuff. So the goal is sort of to be using a lot of raw materials within the system that you can build up, if that makes any sense. And the drone bank is good for rumbling bass, though it can also be really nice for dramatic transitions. And if you don't know what it sounds like, let's see if we can just bring that up. Let's see. So, like, for example, last night at Tresor, I found that being as bassy as the system is, this was really nice to mix in with the kicks, or even to do transitions, because the low end, which might not be so obvious right now, is quite obvious when you have a subwoofer, because you're tuning 5 oscillators together, and you know the differences between them can be quite nice. And you can VCA it and chop it up and make chords with it and stuff. But if you're summing that with a really low kick drum, then the two together can create a really, or you can, the rumble that you may want in between your kicks can be coming from that. Real quick, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. How do you compete with the loudness of mastered tracks which the DJs play before and after?
Honestly, I've never really found it to be too much of a problem as long as I really listen and just make sure to mix. I did try something new last night, though. I asked for a stereo compressor to put in between the mixer and the zone, just with like a 4-to-1 ratio. I don't really think it was that necessary, though, because I think a lot of it depends on how hard you hit the system and how much your signal is punchy and how much because obviously compressed tracks, they're going to hit much harder. And the difference between the kick and everything else, it's going to be hard to match that. But I think if you just acknowledge that it's not going to sound the same, but you can almost hit different facets of the music that'll be just as powerful. And I don't know. I actually have a compressor coming out, a stereo compressor coming out in the fall that's very, it's not a clean compressor. It's meant for pumping. It's meant for techno, and that will be nice to have. But at the same time, I've never had anybody say, like, oh, that was really weak, or that didn't hit hard enough. But yeah, it's an interesting question because mastering is such a huge part, and it's not related to the natural world. The mastering in techno is like, it's not transparent or clean. It's often very punchy. But I don't know. I guess all I would say is just over time, I've gotten better at making it, fit.
So you don't have any problems with loudness?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, last night I had one, but it was barely ever kicking in.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, someone here was there last night. Did it sound okay?
Yeah, it sounded like the kick sounded much better than the guy right before. Like it was a lot louder and a lot deeper.
And the guy before me was playing records, so.
And the guy after.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you do what you do, and I just hope that people like it. But when the system is that big, you definitely have ways of, because you're mixing in real time, of course, so you can make adjustments right away so that it sounds right. And I think that's the most important thing, is just constantly being aware of the balance and getting the balance just right. Because I think compression makes it so much easier for the kick to sit properly. Anyone else?
Can I ask how you, like, in different clubs, like the monitoring situation,
Mm-hmm.
how you deal with that?
That's a hard one, because anybody who's played live a lot in a bunch of different places, you'll know that you don't always get good monitoring. And sometimes you might not get a sound check either. And it can be really interesting when you sort of just have to imagine the things you can't hear, if that makes sense. So that there's these things going on in certain frequencies that you can't hear, and you just have to guess as much as you can. And I don't use any cueing either. So it's this weird tightrope act of like bringing in a sound quickly, but also slowly enough that I can hear it before anyone else does, so I know that it's okay. Does that make sense? Like you just bring it in a tiny bit because you know the sound is coming in, but they don't. So but yeah, that can be problematic if you can't hear anything. And this is a much bigger problem in New York, I think. Like that you might not get a sound check, or you might not, because a lot of times a live set in New York, you're not in the booth. They'll put you on a table that's somewhere in the middle of the dance floor to the side, and you may have a speaker aiming at you, or you might not. So you may be hearing the sound reflected back from the wall, which, once again, good luck. But but that's also why I made these EQs, was specifically because I wanted something that I knew well, that I knew sounded good within the system, that I could very quickly, change a lot of stuff very rapidly.
Do you use those pedals too? Or?
Yes, not as much when I travel, but this one especially. I mean, the wow and flutter I also have as a module in the system, and that's the main thing that I put all my drums through, because it's very dubby. It's not. It was modeled to sound kind of like cassette tape, very dark. Even when it's dry, it's filtering the sound. And compared to like the Pico DSPs or the 4MS, it's has a lot of character. It's kind of trashy and weird. So it's good for adding movement to drums, or to adding something that maybe spatial, but doesn't sound extremely digital. But yeah, in these, this one specifically was meant more for line level and guitar level. And these are work-alikes, the wow and flutter module and the pedal, they're work-alikes, but circuitry-wise they're completely different. Because this one is aimed at a different frequency range, and it doesn't have to CV and stuff like that. But this one, I actually use a lot for drums, and maybe I could just hook it up real quick. Let's see here. I mean, this one can be nice because it's, even though you may have some of this functionality in your modular, sometimes it's nice to have something that's not in the modular, that isn't covered in cables, and that you can just turn to do something. So let's see if the drums went through it. Let's see here. This is a filter box, a multiband filter with multiple modulation sources. It has a pseudo-random with lag. It has a bipolar up and down envelope follower with lag, and it has an LFO and oscillator, and then an expression pedal and CV and distortion, that kind of stuff. So okay, it's coming out of there. Okay. Bear with me for one moment. Okay. Oh, that's why. Okay, so let me engage the pedal. So right now we're taking all the drums except the kick, and we have the kick on a separate channel, I think. Let's see. Sorry. Okay. And it has linear and exponential switches on every modulator, so you can get a very different response out of each section. And sometimes people are confused by the layout, but it's left to right, so you basically have 4 sections that go left to right. And if you have it in just the line mode, it's not overdriving it as much. It's not overdriving it at all. You have high pass, band pass, and low pass. It has a nice crunch to it, so when I don't mind carrying more stuff, I always put drums through this. So that's what that one sounds like. And it pairs really well with the wound flutter. The mini arc is really more for monophonic instruments like guitar or bass. It works really well with bass or guitar. You can put monophonic synths through it as well. These 3, if you plug the 3 of them together with a guitar, it just ends up sounding like a synth. But these 2 with drums or synths or anything like that work quite well. So that's that box. So I can show you, because I want to show you the high gain for a second. It's a module I get a lot of questions about, and it works really well with the drone bank because there's 5 oscillators going. So we're going to take that. The high gain is 3 discrete transistor gain cells. Each one on its own can add quite a bit of saturation, or together, used as a system coming out of the sum out. They work both in parallel and separately, so it'll normal through all 3. And if you take the sum out, then you still have access to all the outputs and CVs, which means that you can sort of use it like a spider where you CV it and send its outputs into many other things to get feedback, etc. One really simple one would be to cross-couple it to itself. And you could VCA that if you wanted. You could put a envelope signal into channel 2 to turn it on and off. Just so you can hear the difference between the clean signal and the high gain, we'll listen real quick to the mix out clean. Okay, so that's the clean signal. And then we'll hear it as the dirty signal. And I really like this module a lot for hi-hats, really trashing anything it's quite good at. It's good at taking a low harmonic sound and adding a lot of harmonics if you want to, make it more squelchy. It's also just a nice module to experiment with, because if you start cross-coupling with other things, like the kitty eyes, very small changes in knob movements make a big difference because it becomes very nonlinear. So paired with a reverb, it can work really well with just a few minimal other sounds. Okay, well, any other questions? Has it been an hour? Nobody has anything to say? Sure. So the kitty eyes, I've made a few different chaotic oscillators over the years, but the only one still in production right now is the kitty eyes. And it's meant to be sort of our smaller and cheaper way to have something in your system that is a chaotic attractor. And for those of you that don't know what that means, you can think of it as an oscillator that's non-periodic but not random. So if you look at it on a scope, it's a quadrature oscillator, so it's X and Y. And if you look at one side of it on a scope, it sort of looks like an EKG, where you have a waveform that has an order to it, but if you actually look at it over and over, it doesn't repeat the same way. And then if you look at the quadrature waveform on an XY scope, or phase view, you see the signature of the attractor spinning in phase space. And a good way to describe it, it's not dark in here right now, but if you had a flashlight and you were to trace out the shape of the attractor, a chaotic attractor always makes the same shape, but never in the same place twice. And so it's not predictable beyond a few steps, but it's not like white noise where it's completely random. And because of that, it's a very complex signal with a lot of information in it. It works well for shift registers, digital algorithmic modules that have CVNs like the ARD-Core or the, what's that? I can't think of the name of it. It's Ornament and Crime. But if you listen to the signal, if you're not paying attention, you might think it sounds like white noise, but it really doesn't, because it's not equal in all frequencies, and let's see here. It really has more of a cloud sort of a sound. attractor or attractor's type has a different sonic and phase space signature. Like the Dreamboat, the first module I ever made many years ago, if you listen to that one, it sounds like this. And this one's really good for like cowbell or snare because you can use it in place of a noise source, but the noise source will always be moving. We have a lot of bass on the channel right now. But because they're XY, the two outputs sound different from a frequency perspective. But moving back to the kitty eyes, it starts like any chaotic system. It starts as a non-chaotic system, like a sine wave. In this case, it starts as a sinoid signal, and then it doubles, and then it breaks into chaos around there, and then the knob changes the amount of chaos. And you might think, what the hell do I do with that? But one of the things that they're useful for, like a very simple one, is they're a good FM source for modulating other sine signals or other oscillators because they're so rich in changing harmonics. Also, if you VCA them, they're good as drums. But they're also good, like I said, driving shift registers, etc. But all the ones that I make have a trigger output, which you could call a chaotic trigger. And because it's choosing a threshold to make a pulse at, but the waveform is constantly changing, you can get a string of triggers that is non-periodic. And because this is not a simulation, these are analog systems. They're not like, the only way I can describe it is they're kind of like having an anthill. It is a true physical system that becomes chaotic. And so it does have a weird personality, is the only way I can put it. So if you use the trigger out in conjunction with, let's say the 4MS clock dividers, which have a reset in, and they have a couple different inputs for CV, or if you take your master clock and you put it into the CV in of this, and then you take the trigger outs and you combine that with your main clock, you can get these interesting shifts in the clock that sound very organic. Sometimes people say it sounds like hand drumming or something, but you can, and depending on how much you add, like if you VCA it, you can get these very unique, or just people, like the listener might not know what happened to the beat, and the beat will change and then go back to normal. And you can also use the trigger source as a fun kind of sound with delay or whatever. Because it has that weird quality to it. I don't know if I can make a patch with it quickly enough to show you like an awesome application of making a rhythm with it, but just trust me, the chaotic triggers are quite interesting because they have an order to them, but they're not periodic. So a lot of times if you use them to make a beat or to alter a beat, the listener will keep thinking that they're getting the rhythm of the beat, but then as soon as you think you've predicted it, it's not the same. But it's not entirely spastic either, so it doesn't have to be like just ridiculous junk. And they work well within the context of other drums that are regularly clocked, if that makes sense. Okay, well, is that all right?
That is more than all right.
Thank you.